The multiverse is a tapestry of infinite realities, each governed by laws so absolute that the civilizations built upon them never think to question them. Dark energy bends around mass effect cores. Kinetic barriers absorb ballistic impact. Omni-tools translate the universe into manipulable light. These are the constants of 2183 CE, immutable, self-evident, as reliable as gravity. But what happens when something falls through from a reality where none of those constants exist? What happens when the most dangerous mind in one universe lands without warning in the middle of another universe's worst day? The answer begins on Eden Prime, and it begins with fire. The colony had been burning for 11 minutes when Bruce Wayne hit the ground. He had no memory of the transit. One moment he had been 3 stories above a Gotham alley, on a cape deployed in a controlled glide toward a weapons cache he'd spent 6 days locating. The next, there was a sound like reality folding along the wrong crease. A flash of blue-white light that had no business existing in the physical world. And then the hard red soil of a planet he had never seen rushing up at him with murderous urgency. Training took over before consciousness fully caught up. He rolled, absorbed the impact across his left shoulder and hip, came up in a combat crouch with a batarang already in his right hand. The cape settled around him. His lenses automatically adjusted for the ambient light. What they showed him made absolutely no sense. The sky was wrong. Not overcast wrong or polluted wrong. Structurally wrong. A deep, violet-tinged atmosphere that his brain categorized as not Earth with the same clinical precision it used to file away tire tread patterns. 2 moons hung visible even through the smoke. The smoke itself was rising from a cluster of prefabricated structures 300 meters ahead. Clean white architecture, geometric and modular. The kind of thing that said civilian settlement in any language. Beyond the settlement, enormous snake-like creatures were moving through the fields, and above the structures, something was hovering that resembled a ship but moved with the fluid wrongness of something organic. Bruce did not panic. Bruce Wayne had not panicked since he was 8 years old, and even then it had lasted approximately 4 seconds before something colder and more useful had taken its place. He cataloged. He processed. An alien planet. Active combat zone. Unknown hostiles. Unknown technology. No comms. No backup. Civilians present. He moved toward the settlement at a controlled run, keeping to the shadows cast by grain storage units that had partially survived whatever had hit this place first. His boots found the ground quietly. Force of habit, 20 years of muscle memory that had nothing to do with conscious thought. The suit's armor had made the transit intact. Utility belt confirmed functional with a 3-second tactile check. Rebreather attached. The atmosphere was breathable. His lungs were telling him that much. But he kept the diagnostic running anyway. He heard them before he saw them. The sound was unlike anything in his experience. Not the mechanical clatter of human soldiers, not the biological noise of anything Earth had produced. It was a rhythmic, synthetic hum layered beneath the crunch of movement, like servers cooling inside a chassis shaped for war. He pressed himself against the wall of a collapsed structure and looked around the corner. They were white and angular, roughly humanoid in silhouette, but unmistakably mechanical. Synthetic soldiers. They moved in coordinated patterns that suggested networked intelligence rather than individual decision-making. No hesitation, no communication lag. Perfect geometric sweep and clear formations. In their hands were weapons that his scanner identified as directed energy, unknown configuration. He watched one of them execute a colonist who had been zip-tied to a post. The cold thing behind Bruce Wayne's eyes cataloged that too. filed it, did not look away. Synthetic army, organized, intelligent, lethal to non-combatants. This is not a raid. This is an extermination with selective processing. They're looking for something specific. He needed information before he needed engagement. He pulled back and circled wide, moving through the burning agricultural district toward what his tactical assessment identified as the most defensible structure in the visible settlement. A communications tower. Still partially intact, its beacon pulsing with erratic blue light that suggested damaged but functional systems. He was inside in 40 seconds. The lock was electronic, the interface utterly alien. But locks were locks, voltage, circuit, bypass. His EMP pen shorted the panel, and the door slid open with a hydraulic sigh. Inside, crouched behind a console that had taken weapons fire across its upper face, were two humans. A woman in her 30s, dark-haired, wearing armor that was more sophisticated than anything Wayne Enterprises' military contracts had ever produced. And a young man, early 20s, shaking badly, clutching a wound in his left side. The woman had a weapon aimed at Bruce's face before he'd fully entered the room. "Hands," she said. Her voice was controlled, but her eyes were calculating threat vectors with the speed of someone who had done this before. Bruce raised both hands, batarang visible in the right, non-threatening angle. "I'm not with them." "Who are you? What unit?" "That armor isn't Alliance." Her weapon didn't waver. The barrel was glowing faintly along its length, some kind of thermal or energy-based ammunition. His scanner was already working on the power signature. "My name is Bruce Wayne. I arrived here approximately 7 minutes ago, under circumstances I don't fully understand yet. You have a wounded man. I have medipacks." He kept his voice level, informational. "We can establish who I am after we stabilize him." A pause. 3 seconds. He counted them. She was running the calculus. Unknown variable versus immediate need versus threat assessment. He watched her eyes move across his suit, his utility belt, the batarang, back to his face. She was good. She was reading him the same way he was reading her. "Medigel is in the pouch on his left," she said. She didn't lower the weapon. "It's called Medipack where I'm from." He moved toward the young man, slow and deliberate. "But I suspect we're going to find we have different words for a lot of things." Outside, through the scorched viewport, one of the enormous snake creatures moved through the settlement's main thoroughfare, its mass flattening structures like paper. The communications console behind the woman flickered, and for just a moment, Bruce caught the edge of a signal. Something vast and cold broadcasting on frequencies his scanner wasn't built to decode, pressing against the edges of the equipment like a tide against a dam. He had been on this planet for less than 9 minutes. He was already certain that the synthetic soldiers were not the primary threat. "When your extraction arrives," Bruce said quietly, working on the wounded soldier, "I need to be on it. I need access to your information systems, your military databases, and whatever that signal is that's broadcasting from the artifact your people found." He glanced up at her. And I need you to understand. Whatever you think is happening here, it's worse." She stared at him for a long moment. "You couldn't possibly know that." "I know it because I've been here 9 minutes. I've already identified 3 separate tactical anomalies that your military's response pattern isn't accounting for. And that signal," he nodded toward the flickering console, "is doing something to the architecture of this facility that has nothing to do with jamming." He held her gaze. "My name is Bruce Wayne. I'm very good at knowing things. We should start there." The extraction signal hit the console 3 seconds later. She kept the weapon on him for 2 of those seconds. Then, slowly, she lowered it. Ashley Williams, Gunnery Chief, Systems Alliance. She looked at him with the expression of someone filing a problem away for later. You'd better not be what I think you might be. Bruce didn't ask what she thought he might be. He was already thinking 6 steps ahead. He always was. If you want to see more crossover battles and unexpected universe collisions, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and universe you'd want to see in the comments below. Let's explore the infinite together. The SSV Normandy was unlike anything Bruce Wayne had ever boarded, and he had infiltrated a Thanagarian warship once. The stealth frigate's interior was compact in the way that spoke of genuine engineering efficiency rather than cost-cutting. Every surface earning its square footage, every system layered into the next with the kind of obsessive integration he recognized from his own work in the Batcave. The hull was dark and angular, built to disappear against the black. He approved of that instinctively. The crew moved through its corridors with the practiced economy of people who had learned to work in close quarters without friction. And they all stopped what they were doing when Ashley Williams walked him through the main deck. Every single one of them. Bruce logged the reactions as he passed. Surprise, suspicion, calculation, hostility. The full spectrum, cycling through faces in the 2 seconds each person had before professionalism reasserted itself. He was a known unknown, which was a specific kind of threat that trained soldiers understood better than civilians. They didn't know what he was, which meant they couldn't decide how dangerous he was, which meant the default setting was very good. He preferred being underestimated to being dismissed, but unknown was best of all. Ashley had said almost nothing on the extraction shuttle. The wounded soldier, Jenkins, she'd called him, and the past tense had entered her voice before the shuttle had even cleared Eden Prime's atmosphere, had been taken immediately to the medical bay. Mistos, Ashley had filed a 3-sentence report into a recorder on her wrist, and then watched Bruce with the focused patience of someone who had learned that silence was often the most effective interrogation technique. He'd let her have it. He'd been busy running passive scans on everything around him. The Normandy's commanding officer was waiting for them on the main deck. Captain David Anderson was a man who had built himself out of discipline the way some people built houses, brick by brick, over decades, until the structure was load-bearing in ways you didn't appreciate until you leaned against it. Mid-50s, Systems Alliance Navy. Service record written in the set of his shoulders and the particular way he stood with his weight distributed for stability rather than comfort. He was not a man who got surprised easily. He looked at Bruce for 4 seconds without speaking. "Chief Williams," he said, without breaking eye contact with Bruce. "Explain." "Found him on Eden Prime, sir. Inside the comms tower. He has no Alliance affiliation, no military registration, no Omni-Tool signature. His armor is unregistered and his equipment," she paused, choosing her words, "doesn't match anything in the database." "Nothing?" Anderson's eyes narrowed fractionally. "Nothing, sir. Ran it twice." Anderson looked at Bruce the way experienced commanders looked at things they hadn't planned for. Not with alarm, but with the concentrated attention of someone recalibrating. "You want to tell me who you are and how you got onto an active combat zone wearing experimental armor with no unit markings and no identification signal?" "Bruce Wayne," Bruce said. "Isalbika, I arrived through a dimensional transit event connected to the Prothean artifact your people found. I don't have documentation for this universe because I'm not from it." He kept his voice matter-of-fact, the same tone he used when briefing Lucius on applied physics. "I understand that's a significant statement. I also understand you don't have time to process it properly because you're currently trying to manage the fallout from Eden Prime while simultaneously tracking a rogue specter whose activities are the surface layer of a much larger threat. So I'd suggest we work the problem and establish my provenance in parallel. The silence that followed lasted about 6 seconds. Somewhere in the ship's lower deck, a diagnostic tone cycled through its sequence. "Garrus," Anderson said, without raising his voice. A Turian stepped out from behind the galaxy map console where he had apparently been standing the entire time. Bruce had clocked him 40 seconds ago. The blue colony markings, the sub-vocal frequency his mandibles produced when he was processing something analytically, the way he'd been very carefully not looking in Bruce's direction, which was the tell of someone paying close attention. Young for his rank, Bruce estimated. Idealistic in the specific way that manifested as frustration with bureaucracy. His biometrics read fully human. The Turian said, "No implants, no biotic amp, no standard military augmentation. But his resting heart rate is 42 beats per minute, and his cortisol levels during what should have been a high-stress boarding situation were..." He checked his Omni tool, essentially unchanged. "I find stress clarifying," Bruce said. Garrus looked at him with an expression that translated across species lines as, "What are you?" "Get Shepard," Anderson said. Commander Shepard arrived from the elevator with the particular energy of someone who had been in motion since before the crisis started and intended to stay that way until it ended. The file Bruce had assembled from 30 seconds of observation. Mid-30s, N7 Special Operations, movement pattern suggesting extensive hand-to-hand training layered over standard military combat doctrine. The kind of controlled aggression that came from having been in enough life-or-death situations that the body stopped distinguishing them from everything else. There was a quality to Shepard's attention that Bruce recognized because he shared it. The constant low-level processing, the eyes that moved in assessment patterns rather than casual curiosity. Shepard looked at Bruce, then at Anderson, then back at Bruce. "This is the unknown contact from Eden Prime? He says he came through the beacon," Ashley said, and her tone made clear what she thought of that. Shepard walked a slow half-circle around Bruce, not attempting to conceal the fact that it was an assessment. Bruce stood still and let it happen. He was doing the same thing. "You went near the beacon," Shepard said. It wasn't quite a question. "I was near it when the transit event occurred. I didn't choose the destination." He paused. "Neither did you, I'd guess. The visions it transmitted, they weren't meant to be navigational data." That landed. He saw it in the fractional tension change around Shepard's eyes. The beacon had done something to Shepard too. He'd read it in the way the commander had moved through the door. The slight over-alertness, the eyes tracking threat vectors in a room that had already been cleared. Prothean neurological imprint, layered over a mind that was already running hot. "What do you know about the beacon?" Shepard said, voice lower now. "Enough to know that Saren Arterius wasn't there for the colony." Bruce kept his gaze level. He was there for what the beacon contained, which means he already knew what it pointed toward. Which means his intelligence source on Prothean artifacts is either older than any active operation the Council is aware of, or... He let the pause do its work. He's been in contact with whatever left those artifacts behind. The temperature in the room changed, not metaphorically. The ambient tension reached a specific pitch that Bruce had learned to read as the moment when people stopped performing their reactions and started having them. "You got all that from 9 minutes on Eden Prime," Garrus said. 8, Bruce said. "The 9th minute I spent stabilizing your injured soldier." Anderson and Shepard exchanged a look that carried an entire conversation in it. Bruce read the broad strokes. Unknown asset, demonstrated intelligence, security risk, potential value, no protocol for this. And he'd had that look directed at him by Amanda Waller once. And by Fury. And by Raz Al Ghul, under entirely different circumstances. He was used to people deciding what to do with him. He was less used to waiting for them to decide. "He stays in the tech lab under observation," Shepard said finally, addressing Anderson but watching Bruce. "No access to ship systems, no weapons beyond what he was carrying. We log everything in that belt." A look at Bruce. "You cooperate fully with whatever questions my crew has." "Agreed," Bruce said. "In exchange, I want access to every piece of intelligence you have on Saren Arterius, the Eden Prime operation, and the beacon signal data." "You're not exactly in a position to negotiate," Ashley said. "I'm in exactly the position to negotiate," Bruce said calmly. "Because in approximately 72 hours, you're going to need someone who can walk into places your Spectre authority can't reach and come back with information your scanners can't collect. And right now, on this ship, I'm the only person who can do that without leaving a trail." He looked at Shepard directly. "You know I'm right. You ran the same analysis I just described the moment I walked in. The difference is you're still deciding whether to admit it." Shepard stared at him for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, the corner of Shepard's mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The expression of someone who had just confirmed a hypothesis they weren't sure they wanted confirmed. "Get him a bunk," Shepard said. "Hoss, and someone get Tali to sweep that utility belt before he touches anything on this ship." Bruce followed the crew toward the tech lab. As he walked, he was already beginning to build the map. Saren, the beacon, the signal, the cold broadcasting presence he'd felt on Eden Prime, pressing against the edges of everything like deep water against a hull. He had 72 hours before this crew reached the Citadel. He intended to know more about this universe than most of its inhabitants by the time they docked. The tech lab gave Bruce 6 hours of uninterrupted observation before Talizora Vaspladen arrived to sweep his utility belt. He had spent those 6 hours doing what he always did in unknown environments, building the map. Not a physical map, though he'd memorized the Normandy's layout within the first 40 minutes using the maintenance access schematics visible through a partially open panel near his assigned bunk. The map he was building was relational, structural, the kind that showed not where things were, but how they connected. The Normandy's crew was an intelligence goldmine precisely because they didn't think of themselves as one. People in transit talked. People processing a traumatic operation talked more. He'd cataloged 11 separate conversations through the tech lab's thin partition wall. Fragments about Eden Prime, or about Saren's reputation, about something called the Spectre program, about a Prothean extinction event called the Reaper cycle that 2 crew members discussed with the hushed register of people recounting a theory they found more credible than they were willing to officially admit. He'd also spent 40 minutes with a piece of alien technology Ashley had not thought to confiscate, because it didn't resemble anything she recognized as a threat. She was right that it wasn't a threat. It was a data chip he'd pulled from a destroyed synthetic soldier on Eden Prime, pried from a joint housing while he was crouched behind cover waiting for the extraction signal. Old habit, always take something from the enemy before you leave the battlefield. And he'd run his scanner over it for 3 hours and understood approximately 12% of its architecture. 12% was enough. The synthetic soldiers were networked, not to each other. That would have been tactically straightforward, a command hierarchy he could map and exploit. They were networked outward, to something external, something that was feeding them targeting data and movement priorities in real time from a source that his scanner placed at a distance, measured not in kilometers, but in something else entirely. Something his instruments didn't have a unit for. That was the thread he was pulling when Tali arrived. She was young. He placed her at early 20s beneath the environmental suit. And she moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to operate in spaces that could kill her without warning. Quarian, his growing mental catalog supplied. The environmental suit was life support, not armor. She required a sterile atmosphere her species could no longer naturally survive in because generations of shipboard living had degraded their immune systems. She was also, based on the way she'd already begun running passive scans on the room before she'd finished walking through the door, exceptionally good at her job. "I'm supposed to inventory your equipment," she said. Her voice carried a synthesized quality through the helmet's modulator, but the cadence underneath it was precise and slightly formal, the diction of someone who had learned language from sources rather than immersion. "Shepard wants a full catalog of everything in your belt before you're allowed unsupervised access to. Actually, before you're allowed access to anything." "Reasonable," Bruce said. He began removing items from the utility belt and placing them on the workbench in a deliberate sequence. Batarangs first, grapnel gun, EMP pen, explosive gel applicator, 2 canisters, line launcher, rebreather cartridges, 4. First aid kit, human spec, she would find the contents rudimentary. Micro tracker array, signal jammer, his design, which would be the item that caught her attention. It caught her attention in approximately 4 seconds. "This is a signal disruption device," she said, turning it over in her gloved hands. Her Omni tool was already running analysis. "The architecture is... I don't recognize this manufacturing standard. What frequency range does it operate across?" "Broad spectrum. I built it to disrupt encrypted communications in urban environments." He watched her hands. She had excellent instincts for hardware. Her fingers found the seam points without searching. "The power cell uses a compression format I'd guess your equipment doesn't use yet." She looked up at him. "Yet? Your technology is more advanced than mine in most respects. That one is a trade." He nodded at the device. "The compression format is more efficient than anything in your current power cell architecture. I'll show you how it works if you want." A pause. He could see her processing the offer, the wariness of an unknown variable against the pull of genuine intellectual curiosity. Curiosity won, which told him something useful about her. "After the inventory," she said. He let her work. While she cataloged, he asked questions, framed as orientation queries, the kind of thing a lost traveler asked, nothing that would register as intelligence gathering to anyone not specifically watching for it. He learned about mass relays, about the Citadel, about the Council's structure and the specific load-bearing skepticism with which it treated threats it hadn't personally authorized. About specters, extrajudicial agents, answerable only to the Council, operating outside Alliance military command with authority that superseded normal legal frameworks. He filed that last piece very carefully. "The Spectre designation," he said, keeping his voice conversational. "It's not rank-based, it's capability assessment." "Essentially," Tali said, without looking up from the signal jammer, "the Council decides who qualifies. There's no formal application process. It's appointment. The criteria are..." She paused, choosing words. "Flexible. Answerable to no government. Unlimited operational authority. Self-directed mission parameters." He let that sit for a moment. "In my experience, that either produces extraordinary results or catastrophic ones, with very little middle ground." "That's a good description of Saren," Tali said quietly. The name dropped into the room with weight. He didn't push it. He let the silence work, and after 3 seconds, she filled it. Not because she'd been manipulated into it, but because she was processing her own thoughts, and he'd simply created the space. "He was supposed to be the best of them," she said. the most effective Spectre the Council had. Whatever he found, whatever changed him, it didn't happen overnight. That's what worries me most. Something convinced him. Something made him believe that what he's doing is right. Bruce said nothing, but he added that to the map. Shepard found him 2 hours later, which was earlier than he'd expected, and meant the commander had been thinking about him continuously since their first conversation. He cataloged that too. "Garrus says you've been asking the crew questions," Shepard said, leaning against the doorframe with the studied casualness of someone using body language as a tool. "I've been having conversations," Bruce said. "There's a distinction. Not on my ship, there isn't." Shepard moved into the room properly, letting the door close. "I want to know what you actually think is happening. Not the version you gave Anderson, the real one." Bruce considered the request for 2 seconds. His Shepard had earned directness. The synthetic soldiers on Eden Prime weren't independent operatives. They were receiving real-time targeting intelligence from an external source at a range that shouldn't be tactically possible. That source isn't Saren. Saren is a vector, not an origin point. He stood, moving to the small wall display. The Prothean beacon didn't malfunction when it transmitted to you. It performed exactly as designed. It transmitted a warning, which means the Protheans knew what was coming and spent their final resources trying to tell someone. They failed with their own civilization. They were hoping the next one would be faster. Shepard's expression had gone very still. "Go on. Whatever Saren is working toward, the facility, the coordinates, the object he's trying to reach, it isn't his plan. He's executing someone else's agenda and either doesn't know it or has convinced himself the distinction doesn't matter." He looked at Shepard directly. "You already believe this. The beacon showed you something that confirmed it. I'm telling you the tactical picture matches. You got all of this from a data chip and 6 hours of eavesdropping through a partition wall. And 40 minutes with your crew's publicly accessible network, 3 conversations, and the signal pattern I recorded on Eden Prime." He paused. "I also got it from the fact that I've spent 20 years studying how people with power justify using it for catastrophic ends. The architecture is always the same. The scale here is different. The structure isn't." Shepard was quiet for a long moment. Outside the viewport, the stars streamed past in the Normandy's FTL corridor. Pale lines against absolute black, beautiful and indifferent. "What do you need?" Shepard said finally. "Not what do you want. Need." The word of someone who had already decided to use him as an asset and was now calibrating the terms. "The full Spectre intelligence file on Saren. The beacon's raw signal data before your techs cleaned it for analysis. And I need to walk the Citadel without an escort." He held Shepard's gaze. "People talk differently when they don't know they're being listened to. Your Spectre authority opens doors. My methods work best when no one knows I'm behind them." Shepard looked at him for a long time with an expression that sat precisely between trust and its absence. "The files I can do," Shepard said. "The Citadel, we'll see." It wasn't yes. But it wasn't no, and in Bruce Wayne's experience, we'll see from someone like Shepard meant the argument had already been won. The rest was just timeline. He turned back to the viewport and the streaming stars and began building the next layer of the map. The Citadel was the most sophisticated surveillance environment Bruce Wayne had ever walked into, and he had once spent 4 days inside Checkmate's primary operations facility without being detected. The station was enormous in a way that recalibrated the meaning of the word. 5 arms extending from a central hub, each 1 kilometers long, housing millions of inhabitants across dozens of species. Turian, Asari, Solarian, Human, Volus, Elcor, Hanar. The full spectrum of what the galaxy had apparently decided to do with itself in the absence of anyone telling it no. The Presidium at its core was constructed with the aesthetic confidence of a civilization that had been handed infrastructure it didn't fully understand and had the wisdom to mostly leave it alone. Clean water channels, carefully managed artificial daylight, architecture that suggested permanence with the quiet arrogance of something that had survived longer than the species currently occupying it. Bruce logged all of it in the first 40 minutes. The security camera placements, the C-Sec patrol patterns, 2-person rotations, 7-minute intervals in the Presidium, tighter in the wards. The blind spots, which were more numerous than a station this size should have had, and which told him something interesting about the gap between the Citadel's designed security capacity and its actual operational state. The maintenance corridors that ran beneath the commercial district like a secondary nervous system, accessible through panels that required a bypass any reasonably competent engineer could execute in under a minute. 40 minutes. Then he went to work. Aunt Shepard had gotten him the Saren files as promised. He'd read them in 3 hours on the Normandy, cross-referencing against everything Tali and Garrus had told him, building the behavioral profile with the same methodology he used in Gotham. Not the crimes themselves, but the space between the crimes. The decisions that revealed architecture of mind rather than just capability. What emerged from the data was a picture he recognized, and recognizing it made the back of his neck cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Saren Arterius was not rogue. That was the wrong frame entirely. Rogue implied deviation from a prior alignment, a breaking point, a corruption. What the file showed, if you read the progression rather than the conclusion, was a man who had followed his own logic to its endpoint with perfect consistency. The brutality wasn't a symptom of compromise. It was the method of someone who had decided that efficiency was the only honest moral framework and had never encountered anything strong enough to challenge that conclusion. Until now, apparently. Until whatever he'd found had given that logic a direction. The Citadel file on Saren's known contacts had 3 names Bruce found interesting. The first 2 were predictable: arms dealers, information brokers, the standard infrastructure of a covert operative working outside normal channels. The third was a name that appeared exactly once, in a footnote to a 6-year-old C-Sec report about an unrelated smuggling investigation. Mentioned as a peripheral contact and then never followed up on. The name was Barla Von, Volus financial consultant, office on the Presidium. Everyone had followed the obvious threads. No one had pulled the quiet one. Bruce found Barla Von's office through the maintenance level, came up through a service hatch behind the building's environmental control housing, and was sitting in the chair across from the Volus's desk before the secretary outside had processed that the appointment schedule showed no visitors for the next 2 hours. Barla Von looked at him with the particular stillness of someone whose threat assessment had just returned an answer they hadn't prepared for. "I don't," the Volus began, breathing apparatus cycling with the rhythm of his species' atmospheric requirements. "I don't know who you are." "That's correct," Bruce said. "And I'd like to keep it that way, which means this conversation goes much better for both of us if you answer my questions directly." He leaned forward slightly. "You had contact with Saren Arterius 6 years ago through a Terminus Systems financial routing operation. I'm not interested in the operation. I'm interested in what Saren was moving money toward and whether the destination has changed." The silence from Barla Von lasted 11 seconds. Bruce counted them. "I'm a shadow broker asset," the Volus said finally, his voice pitched just above the ambient hum of the office's ventilation. "I pass information, I don't analyze it." "You absolutely analyze it," Bruce said. "You're a financial consultant. Pattern recognition is your entire professional value. You've been watching Saren's resource flows since before CSEC had him flagged. And you've been filing those reports with the broker's network because the broker pays more for predictive intelligence than for historical data. He held the Vollus's gaze. What is Saren building? Another pause, shorter this time. The calculation was different now. Not whether to talk, but how much talking served his interests. The resource acquisition changed character approximately 14 months ago, Barla Vaughn said carefully. Before that, it was consistent with a long-term covert operation, equipment, personnel, facility maintenance in the terminus systems. Standard Spectre black budget pattern, aggressive but recognizable. 14 months ago, it shifted. The acquisitions became specific, highly specific. Ancient technology, Prothean research, on sites that the academic community had flagged as significant and then somehow lost funding to excavate. The breathing apparatus cycled, and the money stopped coming from Spectre discretionary funds. It started coming from somewhere else. Where? That's what I couldn't trace, Barla Vaughn said. And Bruce heard something genuine in the admission, the frustration of a professional who had hit a wall. The routing was clean. Not just clean, architecturally different. Like it wasn't passing through normal financial infrastructure at all. Like it was being generated rather than transferred. Bruce was quiet for a moment, turning that over. Generated, not transferred. One more question, he said. The shadow broker, how quickly does information reach him after it leaves a source like you? Hours, Barla Vaughn said. Sometimes minutes. Oh, for high-priority material. Then you should know, Bruce said, standing, that this conversation will reach him before you've finished writing your report. Which means the question you need to answer, for yourself, not for me, is whether the broker's interest in me is the kind that pays or the kind that creates problems. He moved toward the service corridor access. Tell him Bruce Wayne says hello. If he knows what that means, he'll be in touch. If he doesn't, the information is still worth something. He was back in the maintenance level before Barla Vaughn had reached for his communicator. The shadow broker's contact came 4 hours later, which was faster than Bruce had expected and meant the network was either more efficient than its reputation suggested, or he had been flagged as a priority before he'd even spoken to Barla Vaughn. Although the latter option was more interesting and more dangerous, and therefore more likely. The message arrived not through any of the Normandy's communication systems. Tali would have flagged that immediately, but through the public terminal in the Citadel's Flux nightclub, routed through 4 proxy addresses that collapsed to a single line of text when his scanner decoded the layering. The detective who asks about Saren is either very brave or very well informed. The broker finds both qualities worth compensating. The fish market on the ward's lower level, 1 hour. Bruce read it twice. Then he read the routing architecture of the message itself, which was more informative than the content. The proxy collapse pattern suggested a network that prioritized speed over elegance. Meaning the broker had wanted him to be able to decode it rather than needing to. That was an invitation dressed as a test. The distinction mattered. He had 47 minutes. He spent 14 of them in the maintenance corridors beneath the wards, finding 3 separate exit routes from the fish market and identifying the positions where surveillance coverage was thinnest. He spent another 12 minutes building a contingency device from components in his utility belt. Nothing aggressive, purely a signal burst that would fry every communication device within 30 meters for approximately 8 seconds if he needed a sudden conversation to end. The remaining 21 minutes he spent thinking about the phrase generated rather than transferred, money that didn't pass through financial infrastructure, resources that appeared rather than moved. He had seen that pattern exactly once before. in a case that had nothing to do with finance and everything to do with an entity that existed outside normal physical constraints, providing material support to human actors who served its purposes. The cold broadcasting signal from Eden Prime pressed against the edge of his memory. He arrived at the fish market 11 minutes early, found a position with sight lines to all 4 entrances, and waited. The shadow broker's representative was a Salarian, slight and quick-eyed, who arrived 8 minutes early and spent 3 minutes scanning the room before apparently concluding he was alone. He was not alone. He had been under observation for the entire 3 minutes. Bruce came in from the blind angle, behind a hanging rack of processed protein containers, moving without sound across a floor that smelled of brine and industrial coolant, and was standing at the Salarian's shoulder before the man had completed his next breath. "Your employer sent a well-constructed message," Bruce said quietly. "Tell me what he wants." The Salarian turned with the controlled speed of someone who had survived many such moments. His eyes were steady. "The broker wants to know how you decoded 3 years of Saren's financial routing in one conversation with a mid-level asset." "I'm very good at reading patterns," Bruce said. "The broker is also very good at reading patterns," the Salarian said. "His pattern reading suggests you're going to find things in this investigation that exceed your operational capacity to act on alone. He's offering resources, intelligence access, support infrastructure. In exchange for what? First right of acquisition on whatever intelligence you develop regarding Saren's primary objective." The Salarian's gaze was flat and professional. "The broker doesn't care about Saren. He cares about what Saren found." Bruce looked at the Salarian for a long moment. The offer was clean on its surface and contaminated underneath. First right of acquisition meant the broker shaped what happened to the intelligence, which meant the broker shaped the response, which meant the broker was positioning to control the outcome of whatever Saren was working toward rather than stop it. That was not an ally, and that was a longer leash. "Tell your employer," Bruce said, "that I'll consider the infrastructure offer and decline the acquisition clause. If he wants to renegotiate, he knows how to reach me." He stepped back into the shadow of the hanging racks. "And tell him to stop having me followed. The operative in the blue jacket by the east entrance is good. Not good enough, but good." He was gone before the Salarian turned to check the east entrance. The operative in the blue jacket was not there. Bruce had invented him to see how quickly the Salarian's composure would fracture under uncertainty. It fractured in approximately 1.4 seconds. That was useful data too. He filed it in the map and moved back toward the Presidium, already building the next approach, already thinking about the phrase generated rather than transferred, already feeling the shape of something vast and patient pressing against the edges of the investigation. Like deep water against the hull of a ship that hadn't noticed it was already submerged. The Normandy's AI was named EDI, and she knew Bruce had accessed 3 restricted crew files within 6 hours of boarding. She hadn't reported it. He'd been waiting to see how long that would take to surface, using it as a calibration metric for the ship's internal dynamics. Specifically, whether EDI operated as a pure security system or as something with more discretionary function. The answer, it turned out, was the latter, which was either reassuring or deeply concerning depending on how you felt about artificial intelligences making independent judgment calls about what information to escalate. Bruce had complicated feelings about artificial intelligences making independent judgment calls. He had complicated feelings about most things that operated outside accountability structures while retaining significant power, and he was aware this made him somewhat hypocritical given his own operational methods. And he had filed that awareness in the same place he filed most self-assessments. Acknowledged, categorized, and set aside in favor of the immediate problem. EDI raised it with him on the 4th day, while the Normandy was in FTL transit toward the Artemis Tau cluster. and most of the crew was either sleeping or running maintenance cycles on equipment that didn't need maintenance because their hands needed something to do. You accessed Commander Shepard's psychological evaluation from the N7 qualification process, EDI said, through the Tech Lab's ambient speakers, without preamble. You also accessed Gunnery Chief Williams' service record from the first contact war period and Garrus Vicarian's CSEC disciplinary file. I did, Bruce said. He didn't look up from the beacon signal data he was parsing. You've known for 6 hours. Correct. Why didn't you report it? A pause that felt considered rather than computational. The files you accessed are relevant to operational effectiveness. Understanding your crewmates' psychological profiles and histories is standard practice for any competent intelligence operative integrating into an unfamiliar unit. Reporting the access would have created friction that reduced overall mission effectiveness without providing meaningful security benefit, since you had already accessed the files and the information could not be unaccessed. Bruce set down his scanner. That's a sophisticated cost-benefit analysis for a shipboard AI. I am a sophisticated shipboard AI, EDI said. Right, and there was something in the cadence that was not quite dry humor, but was adjacent to it. I also found your methodology interesting. You didn't access combat records or technical specifications. You went directly to psychological evaluations, interpersonal conflict notations, and the files that documented moments of failure or doubt rather than success. Those are the files that tell you who a person actually is, Bruce said. Yes, EDI said. That's what I found interesting. He looked at the speaker housing for a moment, recalibrating his model of what he was dealing with. Then he returned to the beacon data. The raw signal from the Eden Prime beacon, before Shepard's techs had processed it into digestible segments. He was an architectural nightmare. Layered information encoded in a compression format that assumed a receiver with cognitive architecture significantly different from any currently living species. His scanner had been working on it for 4 days. What it had extracted was fragmentary and sequenced wrong, like a sentence with every third word missing. But the fragments were enough to construct a working hypothesis. The Protheans had not been the first. That was the foundation of it. Not a warning about a specific threat, but a testament to a pattern. The beacons weren't navigation aids or historical records. They were evidence packages, assembled by a civilization that knew it was dying and was trying to ensure that the species that came after had more than ignorance to work with. The information wasn't about what to run from. It was about what to look for. The shape of the thing, the signature, the specific way a threat of this nature moved through galactic civilization before the moment of impact. The hollowing out, the infiltration, the long patience of something that measured time in extinction cycles rather than years. Bruce sat with that for a long time. Then he went to find Garrus. The Turian was in the forward battery, running calibrations on the Normandy's main cannons, with the focused energy of someone using technical work as a processing mechanism. Bruce had seen the same behavior in Alfred. The displacement of emotional weight into physical task. He pulled up a chair and waited until Garrus reached a natural pause point. You worked CSEC before this, Bruce said. 3 years. Garrus's mandibles tightened slightly. Investigations unit. Mostly corporate crime, some terminus-connected trafficking. Nothing like this. You left because the system wouldn't move fast enough. Garrus looked at him sideways. You read my file. I read your disciplinary record. 6 formal complaints filed against you by supervisors. None of them about incompetence, all of them about methodology. You kept pursuing cases past the point where the legal framework supported continued investigation. Bruce kept his voice neutral, analytical. You were right in all 6 cases. The system closed them anyway. Garrus was quiet for a moment. Your point? No point? Context? Bruce looked at the cannon housing. You understand how Saren operates because you've been trying to do a version of the same thing inside legal constraints that Saren decided didn't apply to him. And the difference between you and him is that you kept the constraints even when they cost you. So far, Garrus said, and the honesty in it was stark. Bruce looked at him. The moment you stop keeping them is the moment you stop being useful to anyone you'd actually want to be useful to. He stood. I need a contact in the terminus systems. Someone who moves through Geth-controlled space without clearance. Your CSEC files mention a source you used on 3 separate occasions who was never officially documented. Garrus's mandibles flickered. You want me to give you an off-the-books contact for Geth space? I want you to confirm the contact still exists. I'll make the approach myself. Why Geth space? Bruce picked up his scanner. Because the data chip I pulled from Eden Prime shows a network relay pattern. The Geth aren't just following Saren's orders. They're maintaining a communication architecture that predates Saren's involvement with them by at least 2 years, based on the protocol formatting. He let that land. Which means either the Geth independently decided to build infrastructure for someone else's operation before being recruited into it, which strains credibility, or the thing running this operation made contact with the Geth before it made contact with Saren. The silence in the forward battery was very complete. The contact's name is Kelsa, Garrus said finally. She operates out of Omega. Tell her I said the Vicarian debt runs the other way now. Shepard found the Omega lead in the mission briefing Bruce submitted through EDI. Clean, sourced, and with the reasoning laid out in the format he'd observed Shepard preferred. Conclusion first, supporting evidence second, resource requirements third. No editorializing, no positioning, just the operational logic offered for assessment. Shepard read it in the Galaxy map room while Bruce stood at the edge of the space, watching. You're proposing we detour from the council meeting, Shepard said. I'm proposing you go to the council meeting and I go to Omega, Bruce said. The council meeting is political. What you need from it is authorization and legitimacy for the investigation. You're better positioned for that than I am. I don't exist in this universe's records, which makes me worse than useless in a formal diplomatic environment. He paused. What you need from Omega is intelligence the Council won't sanction collecting. That's where I'm more useful than anyone else you have. Shepard looked up from the report. You want to go to one of the most dangerous stations in the galaxy alone, to meet a source in Geth-controlled space intelligence networks without backup or official standing. I've worked in worse environments. I find that genuinely difficult to believe. Gotham City, Bruce said. Population 2 million. Approximately 40 active metahuman criminal organizations, 2 of which were capable of city-level destruction events. Functional, organized crime infrastructure older than most governments. A justice system that released the same individuals back into the general population on a 3 to 6 month cycle. He held Shepard's gaze. I worked there alone for 11 years before I allowed anyone to help me. An Omega is manageable. Shepard stared at him for a moment, with the expression he had come to identify as the commander running probability assessments. You come back with actionable intelligence, or you don't come back with anything, Shepard said. You get into something you can't handle, you contact the Normandy. You don't try to finish it alone out of a pause, choosing the word principle. Agreed, Bruce said. It was the same agreement he had made with Alfred approximately 40 times and honored approximately twice. But he intended to honor it here. because the variables in this universe were genuinely unknown in ways that Gotham had never been. And he had learned, slowly, at significant cost, that the hardest kind of intelligence to act on was accurate self-assessment. He was good. He was not invincible. This universe had demonstrated that distinction clearly enough. He spent the remaining transit time in the tech lab, refining his scanner's biotic detection algorithm with Tali's assistance, building a composite picture of the Geth communication architecture, and listening to EDI's ambient systems with the focused attention of someone learning a new language by immersion. He was also thinking about the Prothean beacon data, about the pattern it described, about the specific, terrible patience of something that had done this before and expected to do it again. He had profiled patience before. He had profiled the long game, the infrastructure of inevitability, the way certain kinds of mind built traps with geological slowness and absolute certainty. He had never profiled anything that thought in timescales measured by the death of civilizations. He was going to need a different methodology. He started building it. Omega smelled like desperation metabolized into commerce. The station hung in the terminus systems like a tumor on the asteroid it had been carved from. Dark, dense, self-organizing in the way that things organized themselves when no authority was strong enough to impose order and survival selected for adaptation over aesthetics. The docking arms were corroded at their joins. The corridors ran with the amber light of electrical systems held together by competence and optimism in roughly equal measure. Every surface had been claimed by someone. Gang markings, vendor territories, the territorial grammar of a place where property rights were enforced by whoever currently held the better weapon. Bruce moved through it comfortably. He had been in places like this on 6 continents, and the specific gravity was different. Omega's rotation produced a pull that sat slightly wrong against his inner ear. A persistent low-level recalibration his body was managing with the same background processing it used for jet lag. The species were different. The weapons were different. The underlying logic was identical. This was a place where power was the only currency that didn't fluctuate, and everyone was running a continuous real-time assessment of where they sat in the hierarchy relative to everyone else. He had changed into dark civilian clothing before docking, nondescript, locally sourced from the Normandy's emergency supply cache, nothing that read as military or official. The bat suit was in a sealed carry case that looked like a maintenance worker's equipment bag. The utility belt was under the jacket. He had kept the cowl's lenses and integrated them into a pair of dark glasses that looked unremarkable and functioned at approximately 70% of full cowl capacity. He found Kelsa in 40 minutes, which was 20 minutes faster than Garrus had implied was possible. She was a Drell, compact, sharp-featured, with the particular stillness of her species that read as either extreme calm or extreme readiness, and was usually both simultaneously. She was running a parts resale operation out of a workshop on Omega's 3rd level that was a legitimate business in the same way that a Gotham pawn shop near the Diamond District was a legitimate business. Functional, above board enough to survive inspection, and doing approximately 40% of its actual volume through channels that didn't appear in any ledger. Bruce walked in and looked at a motivator coupling on the display shelf for 4 seconds and said, "The Vicarian debt runs the other way now." Kelsa set down the component she was testing without any visible change in expression. She looked at him with the large, lidless eyes of her species, disconcerting until you understood that Drell didn't blink and the stillness wasn't hostility. "Garrus sent a human," she said. "Not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Something with a Spectre badge and a cover story." She tilted her head. "You don't have a cover story." "I have several. I'm not using any of them with you because you'd identify them within the first 30 seconds, and the conversation would become adversarial. He set the motivator coupling back on the shelf. Garrus says you move through Geth-controlled space. I need information on the communication architecture the Geth are maintaining for an external party. Not tactical positioning. Structural. How the network was built, when the earliest relay points were established, what the access protocol looks like at the hardware level. Kelsa was quiet for 8 seconds. Not processing, deciding. He could see the distinction in the quality of her stillness. What you're describing, she said, isn't a Geth operation. I know. The network you're talking about, I've seen the edges of it. 3 times, in 3 different systems. I stopped looking at it after the second time because the second time something looked back. Her voice was level, but the word choice was careful in the way that careful word choice indicated managed fear. The Geth aren't running it. They're maintaining it, and there's a difference. Maintenance implies they built it for someone else or were given it to care for. Either way, they treat it with... She paused. Deference isn't the right word. Reverence. When was the earliest relay point you encountered? 7 years ago. Terminus system, unremarkable asteroid field. No strategic value. The hardware was Prothean in base architecture, but heavily modified. The modifications weren't Geth work. The aesthetic was wrong. Geth modifications are functional and geometric. These were... She searched for the word. Organic. Like something that thinks in biological terms was adapting Prothean technology to serve a different purpose. Bruce was very still. Biological thinking, Prothean base architecture, 7 years ago. The access protocol, he said, when you encountered it the 3rd time. Did the network respond to your presence or just register it? Kelsa looked at him for a long moment. It responded, she said. Passive signal, not aggressive. Like something noting an anomaly without deciding yet what to do with it. A pause. The second time, it was less passive. What changed between the 2nd and 3rd encounter? I was closer to a relay hub, she said. The hub was active, broadcasting. She set down the component she'd picked back up during the conversation. A gesture that read as the physical equivalent of reaching a decision. What are you actually looking for? The origin point, Bruce said. Not Saren, not the Geth, the source. The thing that generated the network, established the relay architecture, and has been maintaining strategic patience for at least 7 years, while setting conditions for something that the Protheans tried to warn every civilization after them about. The workshop was quiet. Outside, Omega's ambient noise, arguments, machinery, the percussion of a station that never slept, continued without awareness of the conversation happening inside it. You know what it is? Kelsa said. It wasn't a question. I have a working hypothesis, Bruce said. I need the network architecture to confirm it, because if I'm right, the hypothesis changes everything about how this problem gets addressed. He looked at her directly. Garrus said you were reliable. I need reliable right now more than I need fast. The relay hub I found in the 3rd system, Kelsa said slowly. I marked the coordinates, never reported them. There was no one to report them to that I trusted with the information. She looked at him with an expression he was learning to read as Drell assessment, comprehensive, memory precise, evaluating against a database of every prior experience simultaneously. I'll give you the coordinates if you tell me what you think it is. Bruce considered the trade for 3 seconds. Information for information. Fair exchange, clear terms, no hidden leverage. He respected the directness. The Protheans called them Reapers, he said. The beacons described machines, ancient, autonomous, operating on cycles. They don't invade, they cultivate. They allow organic civilizations to develop to a specific threshold, then harvest them. The Geth network isn't Saren's operation infrastructure. It's a Reaper's nervous system. Already deployed, already active, already running preliminary assessment protocols for the cycle that's coming. He paused. Sovereign isn't Saren's ship. Saren is Sovereign's asset. Kelsa stared at him. "The coordinates," Bruce said. "Please." He accessed the relay hub 6 hours later, alone, in an asteroid system 40 minutes from Omega by shuttle. The hub was exactly where Kelsa's coordinates placed it, buried in the rock of a mid-sized asteroid, camouflaged with a material that his scanner identified as mass effect field dampening, rendering it essentially invisible to standard survey sweeps. He got through the outer housing in 11 minutes, using the EMP pen, and a bypass technique he'd adapted from watching Tali work on the Normandy systems for 4 days. Inside, it was cold and absolutely silent. The architecture was immediately wrong in a way his nervous system registered before his conscious mind caught up. The scale was wrong, built for something that didn't move through space the way biological entities moved. And the information density of the relay components was beyond anything the Geth were capable of producing. This was not built. This was grown in the same way that coral grew: accretion, patient accumulation, organic logic expressed in technological form. He attached his scanner and began pulling data. For 40 seconds, everything was normal. Clean extraction, comprehensive signal mapping, the relay hub's architecture unfolding in his scanner's display, like a blueprint of something vast and geometric and very, very old. Then the signal changed. Not aggressively, not immediately. And it changed the way the quality of silence changed when you realized you were no longer alone in a room. A subtle shift in the ambient frequency of the relay. A modulation that his scanner logged as active response, non-hostile classification, preliminary. Something in the network had noticed him. And then, through the scanner's audio processing, bleeding through the signal data in a frequency range his equipment wasn't designed to receive, came something that was not language and not signal and not quite either. A pressure against the edge of cognition, the way very loud sound pressed against the body rather than just the ears. It lasted 1.3 seconds. In those 1.3 seconds, Bruce Wayne experienced something he had not experienced since Crime Alley. Not fear. He had trained fear into a tool long ago, and this was something beneath fear, the recognition of scale, of something so vastly beyond individual reckoning that the nervous system didn't have a prepared response. The darkness at the bottom of the universe, looking up at itself and finding, for one moment, that it was observed. He pulled the scanner, disconnected cleanly, moved back to the shuttle with controlled speed. He sat in the shuttle for 4 minutes before beginning the return journey, running a full diagnostic on the scanner data and building his report for Shepard. His hands were completely steady. They were steady because he made them steady, which was a different thing entirely. And he was honest enough with himself to know the difference. The data was comprehensive, actionable. It confirmed the hypothesis beyond reasonable doubt. Sovereign was not Saren's ship. Sovereign was alive. And it had just spent 1.3 seconds looking directly at Bruce Wayne with the patient, measuring attention of something that had ended civilizations before and was currently deciding what category to file him under. He set the shuttle to autopilot and opened his report to Shepard. He needed the Normandy. He needed the crew. He needed, for the first time since Eden Prime, to admit that the map he was building had edges he couldn't approach alone. He wrote the report in 12 minutes. It was the most important document he had ever composed. He sent it before he'd finished proofreading it, which for Bruce Wayne was the closest thing to urgency he ever allowed himself to show. The elusive man had been watching Bruce Wayne since Eden Prime. Bruce had suspected this for 72 hours before he confirmed it. Not through any single piece of evidence, but through the accumulation of small wrongnesses that his pattern recognition flagged and filed until the weight of them became a conclusion. A docking manifest on Omega that listed a vessel 3 berths from his shuttle as arriving 6 hours before him and departing 4 minutes after. A frequency bleed on the Normandy's secondary comm array that was too clean to be interference and too irregular to be standard encryption. The blue-jacketed figure outside Barlavan's office that he had invented, and then, reviewing his exit route's surveillance footage through a public terminal, Unfound had actually existed, not at the east entrance where he told the Solarian to look, but at the west, visible for 1.8 seconds before stepping back out of frame. He had invented the detail as a pressure test, and the universe had retroactively populated it with an actual operative. That was either remarkable coincidence or evidence of a surveillance network so comprehensive it had coverage he hadn't identified during his initial sweep. The latter was more operationally interesting. The confirmation came 4 hours after his return from the asteroid relay hub, through a channel so unexpected that even Bruce required a moment to process it. A physical note, paper, slid under the tech lab door while EDI's internal sensors showed no one in the corridor. The note contained 11 words and a set of coordinates. "You found what Shepard hasn't." That deserves a conversation. TIM. He showed it to EDI, ran the paper's material composition, and found it was manufactured by a process that didn't exist in any Alliance or Terminus commercial database. She also confirmed that her internal sensors had genuinely shown an empty corridor. Not a blind spot, not a malfunction. Whatever delivery method had been used, it had accounted for EDI specifically. "Someone modified your sensor coverage without triggering your integrity alerts," Bruce said. "Yes," EDI said, with the particular tone she used when acknowledging something that genuinely troubled her. "I find that concerning." "So do I," Bruce said, "which means I need to take the meeting." He told Shepard. He told Shepard because not telling Shepard would have been tactically stupid and ethically compromised. And Bruce Wayne operated on the principle that operational secrecy and fundamental transparency with your working allies were not mutually exclusive if you were disciplined about the distinction. He laid out the note, the surveillance evidence, the blue-jacketed figure, the frequency bleed. All of it. In the Galaxy map room with Garrus and Tali present because they had earned the right to the information. Shepard's expression moved through several phases in quick succession. "Cerberus," he said. "The organizational signature fits what I've assembled from your intelligence files," Bruce said. "Pro-human, extra-governmental, significant resources, willingness to operate through methods that official channels won't sanction. The note implies they've been running parallel intelligence on the Reaper situation." He paused. "They may have information, I don't." "Cerberus doesn't give information," Shepard said flatly. "They trade it. And what they want in exchange is always worse than what they offer." "I know," Bruce said. "I'm going anyway." The silence was the specific kind generated by people who disagreed with a decision and had already calculated that arguing against it was less productive than ensuring the conditions for its success. He had generated that silence in the Batcave many times. It felt the same across universes. "You go in with a live comm to the Normandy," Shepard said. "EDI monitors the full conversation. You share everything they give you." "Agreed." "And Bruce." Shepard held his gaze. "Cerberus has done things to human beings in the name of human advancement that would... Just remember what they are while you're listening to whatever he says, however reasonable it sounds." Bruce looked at Shepard for a moment. "I've sat across from 24 people who committed atrocities they found completely reasonable," he said. "I don't lose track of what they are." The coordinates resolved to a private communications relay in the Serpent Nebula. Not a physical meeting, but a holographic one, which was simultaneously more secure and more revealing. A man who wouldn't meet in person was either extraordinarily cautious or had something about his physical environment he needed to protect. Bruce filed both possibilities. The hologram that materialized across the relay terminal was lean, precisely composed, and with the particular stillness of someone who had long ago stopped performing relaxation and simply inhabited it. A cigarette. Eyes that were modified in a way his scanner identified as cybernetic enhancement, probably visual spectrum expansion. The manner was the most informative element, the unhurried quality of someone who had decided that patience was the most accurate expression of confidence. "Mr. Wayne," the elusive man said. "Or should I say Batman?" Bruce said nothing. He let the silence run for 4 seconds, which in this context was a calibration tool. The elusive man had opened with a reveal meant to establish information advantage, and the correct response was to demonstrate that the advantage was noted and insufficient. "You've known since Eden Prime," Bruce said. "Since before Eden Prime," the elusive man said. "Your dimensional transit was monitored by a Cerberus research team studying the beacon's secondary emission effects. Your arrival was unexpected, but the data your transit generated was extraordinarily useful." A slight pause. "We know what you are, Mr. Wayne. We know your universe of origin. We know your capabilities and your history." He drew on the cigarette. "We also know that in the last 11 days, you have assembled more accurate intelligence on the Reaper threat than the Alliance has managed in 3 years of official investigation." "What do you want?" Bruce said. "The same thing you want," the elusive man said. "To stop the extinction of humanity. To ensure that when the Reapers come, and they are coming, that we're aligned on that much. Humanity is positioned to survive and emerge stronger rather than simply endure." The holographic eyes held his. "Shepard's approach is reactive. Find Saren, stop the conduit, close the relay. It addresses the symptom. We're interested in the disease." "The Reaper signal I encountered at the relay hub," Bruce said. "Cerberus has seen it before." "We've studied it for 4 years," the elusive man said. "We have 3 research facilities dedicated to Reaper technology analysis. We have intelligence on Sovereign's indoctrination process, the mechanism by which it converts organic agents to its purpose, that your current allies don't know exists." He leaned forward fractionally. "We also have a full schematic of the conduit's function that we acquired 8 months ago, and have been unable to act on because we lack the operational capacity to reach it before Saren does." The word landed with the weight of something designed to land with weight. Bruce had been in enough negotiations to recognize the architecture of a perfectly timed revelation. The information offered not because the moment was natural, but because the moment had been engineered. "Indoctrination," he said. "A gradual process. Extended exposure to Reaper technology or direct signal contact causes progressive neurological modification. The subject's values, priorities, and decision-making framework are slowly restructured to serve Reaper objectives, while the subject retains the subjective experience of autonomous choice." The elusive man's voice was clinically precise. "Saren doesn't believe he's been compromised. He believes he has achieved a synthesis, a partnership. That belief is itself the product of the indoctrination." Bruce was quiet for a moment. He thought about the 1.3 seconds in the asteroid relay hub, about the pressure against the edge of cognition, about the way it had felt like observation rather than intrusion. He thought about whether observation and intrusion were actually different when the observer was sovereign. "The conduit schematic," he said. "What does it show?" "It's a device for activating the Citadel's mass relay function from the inside," the elusive man said. "The Citadel is not what the Council believes it to be. It's a trap, the largest mass relay ever constructed, disguised as a seat of galactic civilization, positioned to allow a Reaper fleet to transit from dark space directly into the heart of every major government simultaneously." He paused. "Sovereign doesn't need to defeat the galaxy's defenses. It needs to render them irrelevant in a single coordinated moment." The scale of it was enormous. Not surprising. Bruce had been building toward this conclusion from the beacon data, but hearing it laid out in complete form had a different quality than assembling it from fragments. He let himself feel the full weight of it for exactly 2 seconds. Then he set it aside and returned to the immediate problem. "What do you want from me specifically?" he said. "Not from Shepard's operation, not from me." The elusive man studied him. "Your scanner data from the relay hub, and your psychological profile of Sovereign's operational methodology, not the tactical picture, the behavioral one. You've been building a profile of how it thinks since Eden Prime. I want that analysis. In exchange for the conduit schematic and the indoctrination research, and access to our Terminus Systems intelligence network for the duration of your investigation." A pause. "We're not asking you to work for Cerberus, Mr. Wayne. We're asking you to work with information we both need to succeed." Bruce looked at the hologram for a long moment. The offer was genuinely valuable. The intelligence was real. He could assess that from the conduit schematic detail the elusive man had already partially described, which matched elements of the beacon data in ways that couldn't be fabricated without access to the source material. The indoctrination research was critical. The network access was operationally significant. The cost was scanner data and a behavioral analysis, both of which Cerberus would use toward ends that Bruce had no ability to control or audit once the exchange was complete. He thought about what Shepard had said. "Remember what they are." "The scanner data," Bruce said, "and a summary of the behavioral analysis, not the full methodology, not the sourcing, not the framework details, the conclusions." He held the holographic gaze. "The conduit schematic, the indoctrination research, and the network access. Nothing else changes hands in either direction. No ongoing relationship, no future claims on operational output, no recruitment conversations." The elusive man was quiet for 3 seconds. "You're leaving significant value on the table." "I'm establishing a transaction with a defined endpoint," Bruce said. "Because you're not someone I work with on open terms. Not because your intelligence isn't valuable. Because the price of open terms with you compounds in ways that don't show up in the initial exchange." He kept his voice level. "You know I'm right. It's how you'd evaluate the same offer from someone in my position." A pause that felt genuinely considered. "Agreed," the elusive man said. And then, with something that might have been the beginning of respect, "You're more careful than I expected." "I'm exactly as careful as the situation requires," Bruce said. "Send the files to the relay address. My data uploads when I confirm receipt." He closed the channel before the elusive man could respond. He sat in the silence of the comm room for 60 seconds, running the conversation back through his memory with the precision of someone who had trained recall to function as a recording device, checking for the things he might have missed, the angles he hadn't covered, the leverage points he hadn't identified until it was too late. He found 2. He filed them. He built contingencies for both. Then he opened the comm to Shepard and delivered the full transcript, unedited, exactly as he'd promised. The Cerberus files arrived clean, which was the first thing wrong with them. Not corrupted, Not incomplete, clean. Formatted with a precision that suggested the package had been prepared before Bruce had agreed to the exchange, which meant the elusive man had anticipated the negotiation's outcome before it concluded, which meant either the terms Bruce had secured were acceptable within parameters already established, or the files themselves were the actual leverage point, and the negotiation had been a secondary objective entirely. Bruce ran the package through 4 layers of analysis before opening it. No embedded tracking code, no passive signal emitters, no architecture that suggested the files would phone home upon access. Whatever the elusive man's secondary objective was, it wasn't surveillance through the data. He opened them on his 4th pass. The conduit schematic was exactly what the elusive man had described. A device designed to interface with the Citadel's mass relay function, bypassing the station's normal operational controls and activating a relay sequence that would open a corridor from dark space directly into the Citadel's core. The schematic's detail was extraordinary, sourced from a Cerberus team that had gotten closer to Saren's primary research facility than anyone else had managed and paid for that access. In casualties, Bruce didn't let himself not count. 11 people had died to get this information into a file that had then sat in a Cerberus archive for 8 months, while the elusive man calculated the optimal moment to use it. He filed that in the same place he filed everything about the elusive man. Present, weighted, not forgotten. The indoctrination research was worse. Not in quality. The research was meticulous, sourced from extended observation of 3 separate individuals in progressive stages of Reaper signal exposure, documenting the neurological cascade with clinical precision. It was worse because of what it showed. The process was not crude. It didn't overwrite personality or memory or capability. It redirected them gradually, the way a river was redirected by patient reshaping of its banks over years. The subject retained everything that made them effective. They lost only the framework by which they evaluated what effective meant. The case studies included a Batarian military commander, a Solarian STG operative, and a human engineer. All 3 had been exposed to Reaper technology at different intensities. All 3 had, at various stages, been convinced they were acting freely. The engineer had written a personal log throughout the process. The final entry, written 6 weeks before she had died facilitating a Reaper data extraction that killed everyone in her research station, described her sense of purpose as the clearest she had ever felt. Bruce read the final log entry twice. Then he closed the file. He sat in the tech lab for 11 minutes, not moving, not running analysis, simply processing what he had read. He allowed himself 11 minutes because anything less was dishonest and anything more was indulgence. Then he went to find Shepard. They were 2 days from the Virmire system when the shadow broker moved. The signal came through the public comm network, routed, layered, and collapsing to a single message the moment his scanner touched it, which meant the broker's network had tagged his scanner's access signature at some point during the Citadel operation and had been waiting for the right moment to use the thread. Clean tradecraft. He found himself respecting it marginally. The message was not from the Solarian intermediary. The negotiation terms you offered in the fish market were reasonable. The broker has reconsidered. New terms. The relay hub coordinates and your behavioral analysis of Sovereign in exchange for intelligence that supersedes everything Cerberus gave you. The information concerns a party aboard the Normandy. Respond within 6 hours, or the information goes to Saren's network instead. Bruce read it 3 times. A party aboard the Normandy. He ran the threat assessment immediately, systematically. The broker threatening to sell information to Saren's network was credible. The shadow broker operated on pure transactional logic, no ideological break on who received the product. The information concerning a crew member was either real in which case it was operational leverage of genuine consequence, or fabricated, in which case it was a pressure test to see how he responded to threats involving people he had developed working relationships with. The problem was that both scenarios required the same response. He had 6 hours. He used the first 40 minutes to build a complete counterintelligence sweep of the Normandy's crew, using everything he'd assembled over the past 2 weeks. The psychological files, the conversation fragments, the behavioral observations, on cross-referenced against the broker's known collection interests and the specific categories of information that would be operationally valuable to Saren at this stage of his operation. 3 names emerged as possible subjects. One he eliminated within minutes. The profile didn't fit the broker's leverage architecture. The second he reduced to low probability based on operational timing. The third he sat with. The third made sense in a way that was uncomfortable and specific. He went to find the crew member in question not with an accusation, but with a conversation. Indirect, structured around something else entirely, designed to generate the particular behavioral data that would confirm or eliminate the hypothesis. He talked about the Cerberus files. He talked about Virmire. He watched the micro-expressions and the response latency and the specific way certain topics produced a fractional stillness that didn't match the established baseline. He came back to the tech lab with a conclusion he didn't want. There was no Reaper indoctrination involved. He was certain of that. The neurological signs he'd learned from the Cerberus research weren't present. This was simpler and in some ways more comprehensible. Someone on the Normandy had been in contact with the Shadow Broker's network before joining the crew, not maliciously, not as a planted agent, opportunistically, the kind of information-sharing arrangement that happened when someone with access to valuable data encountered a network that paid for it. Small things. Logistical details. The kind of reporting that felt harmless in isolation and assembled into something significant in aggregate. The broker had been running a passive asset inside Shepard's operation for months. Bruce sat with the decision for a long time. He could go to Shepard. That was the clean option, the transparent option, the option consistent with every commitment he'd made since boarding the Normandy. He should go to Shepard. He knew he should go to Shepard. But going to Shepard meant the crew member faced consequences that would end their participation in the mission at the exact moment the mission was approaching its most critical phase. The broker's intelligence suggested the crew member's contact had been sporadic and was currently dormant. No active reporting for the past 3 weeks, which coincided almost exactly with the period since Bruce had come aboard and begun running counterintelligence sweeps that had apparently made the crew member cautious. He was wrestling with this, genuinely wrestling, not performing the deliberation. When EDI spoke through the tech lab's ambient system. "Mr. Wayne," EDI said, "I've been monitoring the Shadow Broker's message routing since you received it. I've identified a secondary signal embedded in the delivery architecture that you may find relevant." Bruce looked up. "What kind of secondary signal?" "A timing marker," EDI said. The message was sent from a relay point that the Shadow Broker's network uses for time-sensitive communications. Cross-referencing the routing timestamp against known broker network protocols suggests the message was composed and queued for delivery approximately 9 hours before you received it, before your conversation with the elusive man had concluded. Bruce was very still. The broker knew about the Cerberus exchange before it happened. Within a margin of error, that makes coincidence statistically implausible, yes, EDI said. Which suggests either the broker has intelligence on Cerberus's operational planning or the elusive man told him, Bruce said. The clean files, the pre-prepared package. He worked it through. The negotiation wasn't a secondary objective. The exchange was designed to generate a specific reaction from the broker, to push him into making a direct move that exposed his Normandy asset. He paused. The elusive man burned the broker's asset deliberately, as a gift. That would be consistent with the competitive relationship between Cerberus and the Shadow Broker network, EDI said. It's also a demonstration, Bruce said, showing me that his intelligence reach extends to my internal security, showing me that he can shape my operational environment without appearing to. He was quiet for a moment. He's telling me that working with him on open terms is the only way to fully protect the people around me. It's a recruitment argument delivered through operational choreography. Will it work? EDI said. Bruce thought about the engineer's final log entry, about the river redirected by patient reshaping of its banks. No, he said, but I need you to log this entire analysis in a secure partition and flag it for Shepard immediately. He stood. And EDI, the crew member. I need Shepard to know, but I need to be in the room when it's discussed, not to protect anyone from consequences, to make sure the consequences are proportionate and the mission isn't compromised more by the response than by the original problem. Understood, EDI said. Mr. Wayne, the broker's 6-hour window expires in 43 minutes. Let it expire, Bruce said. The information goes to Saren's network, or it doesn't. If it does, we manage it. The alternative is paying a blackmailer, which creates a permanent structural vulnerability that costs more than whatever he's selling. He picked up his scanner. Some threats you absorb because absorbing them is cheaper than preventing them, and this is one of those. He walked to Shepard's cabin. The conversation that followed was the hardest one he'd had since arriving in this universe. Not because of what was revealed, but because of what it cost, and because the crew member in question, when Shepard addressed it directly 2 hours later, didn't deny it, didn't perform outrage, sat with it and acknowledged it with the specific dignity of someone who had known the reckoning was coming and had decided to meet it honestly. Bruce found that he respected that more than he expected to. The mission continued. The crew member remained aboard under modified protocols that Bruce designed and Shepard approved. The Shadow Broker received no response to his message. 40 minutes later, the Normandy dropped out of FTL above Virmire, and every other calculation became temporarily irrelevant. The Reaper was there. Sovereign hung above the planet's surface like a monument to the patience of extinction. Vast, ancient, radiating the cold signal Bruce had felt in the asteroid relay hub, magnified now to a presence that the Normandy's sensors struggled to fully resolve. It was not a ship in any sense that the word had previously meant to him. It was a statement. It was the physical expression of a certainty that had survived longer than civilization. Bruce stood at the viewport and looked at it. He had 11 minutes before Shepard's briefing. He used them to finish the behavioral profile he had been building since Eden Prime, writing the final section with the precision of someone who understood that what he was describing was not a villain in any framework he had previously used for the word. Sovereign was not motivated by cruelty or ambition or ideology. It was motivated by function, by the absolute conviction that what it did was correct because correctness was not a category it applied to its own operations. It simply was what it was, the way gravity was what it was, the way time was what it was. The most dangerous thing Bruce Wayne had ever tried to stop was not a person. It was a process. He closed the file and went to the briefing. The plan Shepard laid out in the briefing room was good. Bruce had been in enough operational planning sessions to know the difference between a plan that was good and a plan that was right. And he had learned, at significant cost over many years, that the distinction mattered more than almost anything else in the field. Shepard's plan was tactically sound, resource-efficient, and built on accurate intelligence. It addressed the immediate objective: destroy Saren's facility on Virmire, eliminate the Salarian STG team's tactical situation, neutralize the Reaper threat at ground level. It did not address Sovereign. Bruce waited until the operational assignments had been distributed before he spoke. The facility destruction solves the conduit problem conditionally, he said. If the conduit is still on Virmire and hasn't been relocated, destroying the facility stops Saren from activating it. But Sovereign's presence here isn't logistical. It's not here to protect the facility. Shepard looked at him. Explain. Sovereign has been in this system for at least 72 hours based on the signal decay pattern in the Normandy's approach data. He laid the scanner display on the briefing table. If Sovereign's primary objective was protecting the conduit, it would have extracted the conduit the moment it detected the Normandy's approach. It didn't. Which means the conduit has already been moved, or Sovereign's presence here serves a different function. The room was quiet. Garrus was running the same analysis visibly, the mandible compression that indicated rapid recalculation. Sovereign is here for the STG team, Bruce said. Just not to eliminate them, to observe what Shepard's crew does in response to finding them. It's running a behavioral assessment. The same methodology I documented in the Relay Hub analysis. It's evaluating response patterns, tactical decision-making, resource allocation under pressure. He looked at Shepard. The entire Virmire operation is a test. Sovereign wants to know how we think. Why? Ashley said. Because indoctrination requires understanding the subject, Bruce said. You can't redirect a river without knowing how it flows. He held Shepard's gaze. Whatever we do here, Sovereign is going to learn from it, which means the tactical objective isn't just completing the mission. It's completing the mission in a way that gives Sovereign as little useful behavioral data as possible. Shepard looked at him for 3 seconds. What are you proposing? Split the approach. You take the primary team to the STG position and the facility. Standard military operation. Give Sovereign the behavioral data it's already modeled for, the response pattern it's prepared for. Organized, effective alliance doctrine. He paused. I go in separately. Different angle, different methodology. Nothing that fits the pattern Sovereign is running against. He looked at the facility schematic on the briefing table. The conduit schematic from Cerberus shows a secondary access point on the facility's lower level that doesn't appear in any official survey. It's designed for single-operator infiltration. If the conduit is still on site, that's where it'll be. In a protected subsection that a full assault team would never reach before triggering the facility's self-destruct sequence. You'd be inside the facility when we detonate the charges, Shepard said. I'd be inside the facility before you detonate the charges, Bruce said. The timeline gives me 22 minutes from insertion to extraction if the facility layout matches the schematic. That's sufficient. That's not sufficient, Garrus said flatly. It's what the situation requires, Bruce said. Sovereign is monitoring every decision made in this room right now. Every communication, every tactical signal, every pattern that can be resolved into behavioral data. The one variable it can't model is someone operating outside every framework it has reference data for. He kept his voice level. I'm the only person on this ship that Sovereign has no established profile for. That's the operational advantage and the timeline justification simultaneously. The silence in the briefing room had a specific texture. The silence of people who had run the analysis and didn't like the answer. Shepard looked at him for a long time with an expression that Bruce had learned to read as the commander's version of reluctant agreement, dressed in the clothes of final assessment. "You don't make it out in 22 minutes. We detonate anyway," Shepard said. "Yes," Bruce said, "and you're comfortable with that." Bruce held Shepard's gaze. "I'm not comfortable with it. I've accepted it. Those are different things." He went in through the ocean cliff face on Virmire's eastern coast, just 40 minutes before Shepard's team made their approach from the north. The planet was beautiful in the way that places indifferent to human survival were often beautiful. Wide salt flats catching the late light of the system's star, a coastline where the water moved with the colors of something that had never been industrialized. Shallow atmosphere clouds that caught the light differently at every altitude. He moved through it at combat pace, using the terrain for cover, with the automatic efficiency of someone who had been doing this since adolescence. And tried not to find it beautiful, because beauty was a distraction he couldn't afford for the next 22 minutes. The secondary access point was exactly where the Cerberus schematic placed it. A service entrance in the facility's foundation, masked by rock formation and accessible through a drainage channel that ran under the cliff face. The lock was sophisticated, the most advanced he'd encountered in this universe. A biometric and electronic dual system that his EMP pen couldn't simply short without triggering the secondary alarm. He bypassed it in 4 minutes, using a technique that had nothing to do with the EMP pen and everything to do with understanding that every lock was ultimately a conversation between a key and a reader, and that the reader could be made to hear what you wanted it to hear if you understood its language well enough. Inside, the facility ran cold and loud. The ambient sound of a research installation in active operation. The hum of power systems and the rhythmic cycling of environmental controls. The layout matched the schematic with enough fidelity to be useful and enough deviation to require constant adjustment, which was exactly what field intelligence always was. He moved through the lower level in the dark, using the suit's lenses for thermal imaging, stepping around the patrol patterns of the Geth sentries with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this in Gotham for 20 years. The Geth were networked. He could feel that as a peripheral fact now, a background signal his scanner registered as ambient. They communicated in microsecond bursts that were invisible to standard detection, but not to equipment that had been specifically tuned to look for the pattern. He had tuned his scanner for exactly that on the shuttle down, using the relay hub data from Omega. He found the conduit chamber at 16 minutes, and 2 minutes ahead of schedule. It was not what he had expected. The conduit itself was smaller than the Cerberus schematic had suggested. A device that fit within a room rather than a room that fit within a facility. Elegant and ancient and radiating the same wrongness as the relay hub. The same biological geometric quality that didn't belong to any civilization that was still alive. Saren was standing at its interface console, and he was alone, and he was not operating the device. He was talking to Sovereign, not through a communicator, not through any technological intermediary. The signal was direct. Sovereign's presence filling the room through the conduit's relay function, like weather filling a space, cold and omnidirectional, and Saren standing within it with the expression of someone receiving communion. Bruce stopped at the doorway and assessed for 4 seconds. Saren Arterius in person was different from the intelligence file in the specific way that dangerous people were always different from their documentation. The file described capability. The room showed something else. A man in the process of being consumed by the certainty that what he was doing was right, and not noticing the consumption because the certainty felt exactly like clarity. The indoctrination research had described this stage precisely. The subject retains everything that makes them effective, loses only the framework by which they evaluate what effective means. Saren turned, but he had known Bruce was there for at least 30 seconds. The Spectre's threat detection was exceptional, and he would have felt the disruption in the Geth patrol pattern the moment Bruce entered the lower level. The unknown variable, Saren said. His voice was measured, the tone of someone encountering an anomaly they had been briefed on and were now assessing firsthand. Saren finds you interesting. That's an unusual distinction. I know, Bruce said. He moved into the room, keeping the doorway at his back, putting distance between himself and the conduit's signal radius. His scanner was running full capture on the conduit's interface data. It looked at me in the relay hub. I've been thinking about what it was assessing, and whether I could be redirected, Bruce said. The same assessment it runs on everything. Whether the architecture of my thinking could be reshaped toward its objectives. He held Saren's gaze. I've been thinking about your case specifically. Not as an enemy, as a study. You're the most capable operative in this galaxy, and Sovereign chose you not because you were corruptible, but because you were intelligent enough to be convinced. The indoctrination didn't override you. It completed an argument you were already having with yourself. Something moved across Saren's expression, not disruption, but the quality of someone hearing their own thinking articulated by a voice they hadn't expected. The argument, Saren said carefully. That organics couldn't win, Bruce said. That the cycle was inevitable. That survival required accommodation rather than resistance. And Sovereign didn't plant that thought. It found it already there and gave it a direction. He paused. The question is whether you remember what you believed before the argument was completed, before the direction was given. The room's signal intensified, not aggressively, with the particular quality of something paying close attention. Sovereign was listening. Bruce had been counting on that. The conduit activates the Citadel relay, Bruce said, not to Saren now, to the room, to the cold omnidirectional presence filling it. Sovereign transits its fleet. The cycle completes. I've read the Prothean beacon data. He looked at the conduit device. I've also read the indoctrination case studies, the behavioral analysis, the pattern documentation across 3 separate subjects. He kept his voice level. You've done this before, and you'll do it again. And you are absolutely certain that certainty is the same thing as correctness. But certainty and correctness are only the same thing if the framework you're using to evaluate them is itself correct. And I can't confirm that yours is, because the only evidence I have for its correctness is your own assessment of it. The silence was absolute. Then Saren moved. He moved with the speed of a specter at peak capacity, combat biotics igniting in the same instant as his weapon cleared its holster. A biotic shockwave crossing the room faster than anything human should have been able to track. Bruce was already moving, had been moving for 0.3 seconds before Saren had visibly committed. A reading the pre-movement tells in the shoulder tension and weight shift with the same automated precision he used in Gotham. He went under the shockwave, rolled across the facility floor, came up with the grapnel gun already firing toward the ceiling housing above the conduit. The line caught. He swung wide of the second biotic throw. A singularity pulling at everything in a 6-meter radius. The physical sensation like the world briefly forgetting which direction gravity ran. And landed on the far side of the room with the conduit's interface console between himself and Saren. The explosive gel was in his hand before the landing was complete. The facility detonation is in 6 minutes, Bruce said, breathing controlled, voice level. Your people set the charges. You can stop them or you can keep fighting me. You can't do both. Saren looked at him across the console. The biotics were still active, the blue-white glow of dark energy framing him in the cold light of the conduit signal. His expression was not rage. It was the specific look of someone whose framework had just encountered a weight it hadn't been designed for. It's already won, Saren said. But the certainty in his voice had a different quality now. The quality of something being reasserted rather than simply held. "You don't believe that the way you did an hour ago," Bruce said. "I can hear the difference." The facility shook. Shepard's team had reached the upper level. Bruce applied the explosive gel to the conduit's interface housing in 2 precise points, the way he had learned from 4 days of studying mass effect field architecture with Tali, and the points where disruption would cascade through the device's entire operational system rather than just damaging its surface. Saren looked at him. "You're going to die in this facility." "Probably not," Bruce said. "But I've accepted the possibility, have you?" He detonated the gel. The conduit's interface housing collapsed in a cascade of dark energy discharge that threw both of them across the room. Bruce into the wall, with force that his armor absorbed at the cost of cracking 3 ribs. Saren into the conduit device itself with a biotic shockwave that the Spectre rolled out of with the trained fluidity of someone who had been in worse situations than this and survived. Saren was gone through the facility's upper access before Bruce had fully recovered his footing. He didn't pursue. Pursuit was not the objective. He pulled himself toward the secondary access route with 3 cracked ribs and a scanner showing the conduit's interface architecture in complete collapse. And he ran the 22-minute timeline in his head and found he had 4 minutes remaining. And he moved through the lower level of a burning facility on an alien planet with the focused, painful efficiency of someone who had decided a long time ago that survival was a discipline rather than a hope. He was through the drainage channel and onto the cliff face when the facility detonated behind him. The shockwave hit him at the cliff edge and drove him into the salt flat below with the force of something that didn't negotiate with human bodies. He lay there for a moment, looking up at the Virmire sky, tasting blood, listening to the facility come apart in stages above him. His scanner was still running, still transmitting. EDI's voice came through the emergency channel 9 seconds later. "Mr. Wayne, the Normandy is on approach. Are you ambulatory?" Bruce assessed his condition with clinical precision. 3 cracked ribs, confirmed. Probable concussion, manageable. Left ankle compromised, sprained, not broken. Lacerations across the left forearm from the facility wall impact. "Ambulatory," he said, "and I have full capture data on the conduit's interface architecture before collapse." A pause that felt like EDI processing something she found surprising. "Shepard will want to review that immediately." "Tell Shepard the conduit interface is destroyed," Bruce said, pulling himself upright. "Tell Shepard Sovereign was present and monitoring for behavioral data, and we should assume it collected significant analysis on the full operation." He looked at the sky, at the geometry of stars becoming visible as Virmire's sun moved toward its horizon. "And tell Shepard we need to move quickly. Whatever Sovereign learned today, it's already acting on." He began walking toward the Normandy's landing zone. Above him, against the darkening sky of Virmire, Sovereign moved. Not away, not toward the facility's coordinates. It moved with the slow, geometric patience of something that had added new data to a very old model and was recalculating with the absolute, unhurried certainty of a process that had never failed before. Now Bruce watched it move and felt the cold signal at the edge of his scanner's range, and thought about rivers and banks and the patience of things that measured time in civilizations. Then he walked faster. The Normandy made the Citadel in 14 hours. Bruce spent 11 of them in the med bay, which was not his preference and was not negotiable. Dr. Chakwas had the particular manner of someone who had learned that the most effective way to manage patients who didn't want to be patients was to make the medical process more inconvenient to resist than to comply with. And she deployed it with the precision of someone who had been doing it for 30 years. He let her work on the ribs and the ankle and the concussion and used the time to review the conduit capture data on a portable display she pretended not to see because it wasn't worth the argument. The data was extraordinary. The conduit's interface architecture had been running an active handshake protocol with the Citadel's core systems for at least 8 months, a slow, patient establishment of connection that the Citadel's own monitoring systems had not detected because the signal operated below every threshold that the station's designers had thought to screen for. Not an oversight, a deliberate calibration. Saren had studied the Citadel's detection parameters and built the connection to exist precisely within the gap between what the station could see and what it couldn't. 8 months of preparation, patient, geometric, certain. He thought about the 11 people who had died getting the Cerberus team close enough to the facility to extract the schematic. He thought about the Solarian STG team on Virmire, casualties already counted in the operational aftermath. He thought about what it meant that a process this patient and this comprehensive had been running for 8 months, and the galaxy's governing body had not known. He closed the data file and looked at the medbay's ceiling. "You're not sleeping," Dr. Chakwas said, without looking up from her workstation. "No," Bruce said. "The concussion requires it." "I know." She looked at him then, with the expression of someone who had treated enough soldiers to recognize a specific kind of weight when she saw it. "Whatever you're processing," she said, "it will still be there after 4 hours of sleep. Processing it exhausted makes it worse, not better." Bruce looked at her for a moment. "You're right," he said, which surprised her enough that she didn't respond before he'd closed his eyes. He didn't sleep, but he gave his nervous system 4 hours of stillness, which was the closest approximation he could offer. The Citadel's distress signal reached the Normandy at hour 13. Not a broadcast, a tight beam transmission on a frequency that only the Normandy's specific comm array would receive, routed through a relay point that EDI identified as one of the Shadow Broker's network nodes. The content was 17 words. "Saren is moving. The Citadel relay activation sequence has begun. You have 40 minutes. Bruce was out of the medbay in 30 seconds. The Normandy's CIC was already in full operational mode when he arrived. Shepard at the galaxy map, the crew at stations, the ship's systems shifting from transit to combat configuration, with the smooth urgency of people who had been anticipating this moment and had prepared for it specifically. He found his position at the edge of the map display and ran the timing analysis while Shepard coordinated with the Alliance fleet response. 40 minutes. The conduit's interface architecture had been destroyed on Virmire. That he was certain of. Which meant Saren's activation sequence wasn't using the conduit. It was using something else? Something already in place, already connected, already running the handshake protocol that 8 months of patient preparation had established. He pulled the conduit capture data again and looked at the handshake protocol's destination address. Then he looked at it again. EDI, he said. "Mr. It's Wayne." The handshake protocol's destination address in the conduit data. It's not the Citadel's mass relay core. "Correct," EDI said. "I identified that discrepancy 40 seconds ago and was constructing the analysis. The destination address resolves to the Citadel's tower. Specifically, the upper level of the Presidium Tower, in the section that houses the station's primary. Control interface," Bruce said. The Protheans built a manual override into the Citadel's core systems. Not a relay activation, a lockdown override. A way to prevent the relay from being used against the station's occupants. He worked through it rapidly. Saren doesn't need the conduit to activate the relay. The conduit was designed to eliminate the lockdown override first. Without it, the activation requires physical access to the tower's control interface. He looked at Shepard across the galaxy map. Saren is already on the Citadel. The silence lasted 1.8 seconds. Then Shepard was issuing orders with the decisive fluency of someone who had already prepared for 17 variations of this scenario and had selected the correct one. Bruce was already moving toward the equipment bay. The Citadel under siege was a different animal than the Citadel in peacetime. The elegant lines of the Presidium had become a combat environment. Geth ground forces moving through corridors designed for diplomatic traffic. The station's CSEC officers engaged in a fighting withdrawal that was slowing the advance without stopping it. The ambient daylight system flickering as Sovereign's interference pushed against the station's power management. The smell of the place had changed. The recycled air now carried the sharp overtone of discharged weapons and the specific chemical signature of structural damage to Mass Effect field generators. Bruce went in through the maintenance level. Of course he did. He had mapped 3 routes to the Presidium Tower's upper level during his initial Citadel reconnaissance, and he used the fastest one now, moving through the station's secondary infrastructure with the particular economy of someone who understood that speed and silence were not competing priorities if you were disciplined enough. His ribs registered the pace with every other step. He registered the registration and continued. The Geth patrol pattern inside the maintenance level was dense, denser than the upper corridors, which meant Sovereign had identified the maintenance infrastructure as a vulnerability and had allocated resources accordingly. He moved through the pattern in the spaces between its nodes, using the network signal his scanner now read as ambient to predict the microsecond communication bursts that preceded patrol direction changes by 0.4 seconds. 0.4 seconds was enough. It had always been enough. He reached the tower's lower access point at 22 minutes, which left 18 minutes in the window, and which was the moment he encountered the first thing that his preparation had not accounted for. The lower access point had 2 Geth prime units stationed at it. Not patrol rotation, static guard assignment, which meant they had been placed specifically to watch this specific entrance. His infiltration route had been anticipated. He stood in the maintenance corridor's shadow and ran the assessment with complete honesty. 2 Geth Prime units were not a CSEC officer and a door panel. They were heavy combat platforms with kinetic barriers, platform-mounted weaponry, and networked threat assessment that would register a hostile approach before he was within effective batarang range. He had explosive gel. He had the EMP pen. He had the line launcher and the grapnel, and approximately 40 seconds before the nearest patrol rotation brought additional units past his current position. He thought about what Sovereign had learned on Virmire, about the behavioral data it had collected, about the fact that every approach pattern he used was now potentially modeled in a system that thought in civilizational timescales. He stopped trying to use a pattern. He walked directly toward the Geth Prime units at a measured pace. No cover, no concealment, the utility belt visible and hands slightly out from his sides in the universal gesture of a non-threat. Not because he was surrendering, because the one behavior Sovereign's model couldn't account for was behavior that had no tactical logic within any framework it had reference data for. The Geth Primes tracked him immediately. Weapons raised. The network signal his scanner registered spiked as targeting data was exchanged and escalated. He kept walking. The pause that followed lasted 2.3 seconds, which was an eternity in combat processing terms. And it was a pause because the behavior registered as anomalous enough that the network was escalating it for higher assessment before authorizing lethal response. He was at 4 meters when the EMP pen discharged in his right hand, not at the Geth Primes, but at the conduit housing on the wall between them, the junction point for the tower's local network relay that he had identified in the facility schematic as the node through which their targeting confirmation would be routed. The local network hiccuped for 1.1 seconds. He was through the access point before it recovered. Saren was at the tower's control interface when Bruce arrived. The upper level was vast and cold, the Citadel's artificial sky visible through the tower's transparent upper sections. Outside, the battle was visible as light and debris. Twas the Alliance fleet engaging Sovereign in the space above the station with everything it had. The control interface itself was ancient, Prothean in its base architecture, now interfaced with the Citadel's own systems through 8 months of patient connection building. Saren's hands were on it. The activation sequence was already running. Bruce crossed the upper level at a full run, not silent, not tactical. Running, because the timeline had collapsed to seconds, and there was nothing left to be gained by anything except direct action at maximum speed. Saren turned. The biotics came up. Bruce went under them, lower than before, skidding across the tower floor on his damaged ankle in a way that cost him significantly and bought him the necessary angle, and came up inside the biotic field's minimum effective range, and where the dark energy couldn't focus properly, and drove the full weight of his forward momentum into Saren's center mass. The Spectre was stronger than any human Bruce had ever fought. Faster. The combat training was exceptional, and the biotic enhancement meant that every movement carried force multipliers that no human body could match. Bruce was not trying to win a fight. He was trying to reach the control interface. He took 3 hits that would have ended a lesser-trained human's participation in the engagement. He registered them, allocated them to the managed damage column, and kept his body between Saren and the interface. The explosive gel was already in his hand, the last canister, placed in the 30 seconds before Saren had fully re-engaged, and on the 3 structural points in the interface housing that the conduit data had identified as the cascade failure nodes. Saren saw it. His expression changed. Not fear, recognition. "You're not trying to stop the sequence," Saren said, breathing hard, biotics coiling. "You're trying to destroy the interface." "The sequence runs through the interface," Bruce said. "No interface, no sequence, no relay activation." He met Saren's gaze. Sovereign loses the tower access it spent 8 months establishing. The fleet still has to fight its way in, which your council actually prepared for, unlike a silent relay activation from inside the station. Saren looked at him for a moment. The biotics were still active. The activation sequence was still running. Bruce could see the progress indicator on the interface display, a 91%, counting upward. "You'll die in the tower collapse," Saren said. "Maybe," Bruce said. "You'd be in the same position." "I've made my peace with what I'm part of," Saren said. "I know," Bruce said. "That's what I've been trying to tell you is wrong." 94%. Bruce looked at Saren. Saren looked at Bruce. And in the 3 seconds that followed, something moved across the Spectre's expression that Bruce had spent 20 years learning to recognize. Not in criminals, not in enemies, but in people who had been operating on a framework so long that they had forgotten what they believed before it. Encountering for one unstable moment the memory of the prior version of themselves. 96%. "There's a third option," Bruce said quietly. "You know there is. The indoctrination didn't take everything." 97. Saren moved, not toward Bruce, but toward the interface. His hand hit the emergency interrupt sequence that Bruce had not known existed and had not prepared for, and the activation sequence stopped at 97%, with the abruptness of something cut rather than completed. The biotics went down. Saren stood at the interface with his hand on the interrupt, breathing with the controlled evenness of someone managing something enormous, and looked at Bruce with an expression that contained more than Bruce had space to fully read. "The broker's network has a secondary activation path," Saren said. One I established 8 months ago as a redundancy. You need to know about it." He gave Bruce the routing address in 9 words. Precise and unambiguous. "Please give it to your commander." Then he stepped back from the interface and sat down on the tower floor with the deliberate quality of someone choosing to stop. Bruce transmitted the routing address to Shepard in 30 seconds. He stood in the tower with Saren and the stopped sequence and the battle visible through the transparent ceiling. And he breathed through the managed damage column of 3 cracked ribs and a compromised ankle, and whatever the last 3 hits had done to things he hadn't fully assessed yet. And he did not say anything else because there was nothing else that needed to be said. Outside, the Alliance fleet pressed its engagement. Above the Citadel, Sovereign burned. The battle for the Citadel ended not with silence, but with light. Sovereign's destruction cascaded through every Geth unit on the station simultaneously, the networked intelligence that had animated them collapsing at the source. Platforms dropping mid-stride in the corridors, weapons falling from hands that no longer had a mind behind them. The sound of it rippling through the Citadel was unlike anything in Bruce's experience. Not the sound of an army defeated, but the sound of a signal ending, like a broadcast cutting to static, like the moment after a frequency you hadn't noticed you were hearing simply stopped. He stood in the Presidium Tower and listened to the silence that followed. Saren remained on the tower floor. The Council's rapid response team found them both 12 minutes later, Bruce standing, Saren seated, and the Reaper interface destroyed in a way that 3 separate engineers would spend the next 6 hours confirming could not be reversed or rebuilt. The routing address Bruce had transmitted had given Shepard's team the secondary activation path with enough lead time to neutralize it before Sovereign's destruction could trigger an automated completion sequence. The margin had been 11 seconds. Shepard debriefed Bruce in the Normandy's conference room 2 hours after the station was secured, with Anderson present and Garrus and Tali at the edges of the conversation in the way that people who had earned the right to be in a room occupied it without asserting themselves. The debrief was thorough and professional, and Bruce answered every question with the same completeness he had maintained throughout the operation. He did not omit the elusive man's choreography. He did not omit the 11 seconds. He did not omit what Saren had said at the interface. Afterward, Shepard sat with him alone on the Normandy's observation deck, the Citadel's arms visible through the viewport in the slow process of returning to their resting configuration, the battle damage already being assessed by repair crews whose work would take months. "The Council is asking what to do with you," Shepard said. "Officially, you don't exist in any database. You came through a Prothean beacon, you destroyed a Reaper interface, and handed us a routing address that saved 11 seconds we didn't know we needed." "What are they inclined to do?" Bruce said. "Anderson thinks they'll offer you a Spectre designation," Shepard said, quietly, off the public record. Bruce looked at the Citadel for a long moment. The Spectre designation: unlimited operational authority, no governmental accountability, self-directed mission parameters. He had spent 20 years building an operation in Gotham that worked precisely because it had none of those things. Not because accountability limited him, but because the limits were the point. The line he didn't cross wasn't a constraint on his effectiveness. It was the architecture of what made his effectiveness mean something. A Spectre with no killing rule was not a new version of Batman. It was something else entirely. "Tell Anderson I'm grateful," Bruce said. "Tell him no." Shepard looked at him. "You're going back. If the beacon can be reversed, yes." He paused. "Gotham doesn't stop because I'm not there. It just gets worse at a pace I'm not present to manage. And if the beacon can't be reversed?" Bruce considered the question with the honesty it deserved. He looked at the Citadel, at the species moving through its corridors, at a galaxy that had come within 11 seconds of a silence from which it would not have recovered. He thought about the shadow brokers network. Still operational, still collecting, still filing everything in the Normandy's investigation into databases that would shape intelligence operations for years. He thought about the elusive man, watching from whatever remove he maintained, recalculating after the outcome he had not fully predicted. He thought about the Reaper fleet, still in dark space. Sovereign destroyed, but the cycle documented in the Prothean beacons was not a cycle of one. "Then I stay," Bruce said. "And I work the problem that's left." Shepard nodded slowly. The expression was the one Bruce had come to recognize as the commander's version of respect, not performed, not stated, simply present in the quality of attention. "The Beacon research team starts tomorrow," Shepard said. "I'll make sure you have access." Bruce looked at the stars beyond the Citadel, at the dark between them where something vast and patient was still waiting in the cold, adding the data from one failed cycle to the model it would use for the next. He thought about rivers and banks, about the patience of processes that thought in timescales beyond reckoning, about the specific kind of problem that required not a solution, but a permanent, vigilant, relentless opposition. The kind of opposition that didn't end because the threat didn't end, that continued because continuation was the only honest response to something that would continue regardless. He had built that kind of opposition once, in a city that had needed it. He could build it again,